and welcome to this special program, Insights in Impact. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. China now has lifted virtually all of its quarantine and travel restrictions, a move closely watched by political leaders, central bank governors, and economists worldwide. What will a Chinese economic recovery look like? Given the extent and scope of challenges to the global economy, what role will China play in 2023 and beyond? I'm joined today by 6 international journalists and political analysts and economists to share their insights. We have Dr. Muhammad Furqan Rao, head of China desk from Associated Press, Pakistan. We also have Mr. Supachai Wuthichuwong, senior reporter from Manager Media Group in Thailand, and Mr. Ikenna Mba Emewu, editor-in-chief from Africa-China Economy magazine. Mr. John Ross is the former director of economic and business policy for the Mayor of London, and Mr. Daryl Guppy, national board member of the Australia-China Business Council. And last but not least, we have Bill Jones, Washington bureau chief with the Executive Intelligence Review. Welcome to all of you, gentlemen. China has reopened itself, aka optimized its COVID and travel restrictions. What do you think China's reopening will mean for the world economy? Let me start with you, Bill, in Washington, D.C.
Well, I think that it's been very encouraging for most of the world, including business people here in the United States, in the financial and in the industrial community, but also worldwide. China has been moving forward, but with this opening up, it created a great sense of optimism throughout the world. Figures that are coming out now from the World Bank and from the IMF show that China's economic growth, in contrast to all the other countries, is moving forward. So again, China will become the engine for economic development. I think the move was very strategic on China's part, and it will have a very beneficial effect in a situation which is very dire in many countries because of the COVID and because of the economic stagnation as a result of this era of hibernation.
All right, thanks for that introduction. Mr. Guppy in Darwin, Australia, how do you see the reopening of China and especially its business and investment links between Canberra and Beijing going forward?
The reopening is welcomed by everybody. There's no question about that. So what we're looking for is fast access into China so that we can restore face-to-face meetings. So businesses can re-establish themselves. We can start to develop new business activities and to explore some of the opportunities that have existed in China during the COVID period. Because in the West, there is this idea that somehow China didn't develop. It stood still or even went backwards during COVID, whereas this is not correct. What we've seen is tremendous advances in the digital economy, and this is something that is of interest particularly to Australia, but to business more broadly. The important thing is that we're able to resume access and improve the diplomatic relations.
The Prime Minister of Australia recently met with the Chinese leader. What do you think are the deliverables of that summit? And, really your expectation, your readings on China-Aussie relations going forward?
It's a delicate situation because the anti-China forces that dominated Australian policymaking for the last decade haven't gone away overnight with the election of a new government. And some of that approach, in fact, is created and formulated by foreign interference in our policy making. So there are a number of think tanks that are foreign funded that have undue influence on Australian policy.
Yes,
so it's a delicate
ASPI,
time.
Right?
ASPI is the leading foreign influence actor in this environment, yes.
All right, fair enough. Let me ask some questions to our friends from Asia. Supachai, you're right now based in Bangkok, Thailand. Of course, your Deputy Prime Minister, along with 2 other ministers, very generously, very graciously welcomed the first batch of Chinese tourists since China's reopening. What's your rating of that gesture? And I guess that has, gone a long way in, attracting more Chinese tourists to your country.
Yes, thank you. Tourism is an important part of Thailand economy. Around 30% of Thai GDP is delivered from tourism revenue, and Chinese tourists account for more than half of all tourists. The Tourism Authority of Thailand executive said that Thai tourism will not be able to return to pre-pandemic level if Chinese tourists do not fully return. This is why Thailand is very welcoming to Chinese tourists.
Dr. Rao, in Islamabad, Pakistan, how do you foresee China's reopening to strengthen China-Pakistan relations, which has been described by both sides as an all-weather strategic partnership?
Yeah, thank you so much. It is very good decision in my view, and all Pakistanis are also very much happy because China has opened itself after the almost 3 years. So this decision is not only good for the world but also for the Pakistan, because many Pakistani students are interested to get higher education in the Chinese universities. Now they will get opportunity again to study there, and the business community want to promote their business ties and enhance to trade. So by opening of the China, now our trade will boost and our youth will be more collaborative, and the people-to-people exchanges would be enhanced.
Yeah, Dr. Rao, if you think about China-Pakistan relations, a signature product of it is really CPAC, right? Which is really a cornerstone. How do you see China's reopening, in perhaps, fast-tracking the CPAC process?
I think it would be a great step for the smooth functioning of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. And let me tell you, China-Pakistan economic corridor is very much significant for Pakistan, as it improved Pakistan's road infrastructure, agricultural development, and it reduced our energy crisis in Pakistan, created job employment, is a very good for Pakistan's economic situation and economic progress.
Yeah, exactly. Recently, I had the privilege of talking to our Prime Minister when he was visiting China, Mr. Shahbaz Sharif. He was the Chief Minister of Punjab, as you know better than I do. And during the governorship there, he really oversaw a series of infrastructure projects, from the first metro line in Punjab to roads and bridges and ports over there. And he said it's his priority to really fast-track the CPAC. All right, John Ross in London, how do you see China's reopening in terms of impacting China-UK relations, economic relations in particular, going forward?
There's two aspects to this. One is the overall, from the point of view of the world economy, it's going to be extremely beneficial, but China's going to become once more the main locomotive of the world economy. If you look more narrowly at the situation with Britain, I'm afraid there's two contradictory factors. One is economically, Britain has a great deal to gain from trade and investment with China. Secondly, however, I'm afraid the British government tends to pursue rather foolish policies. I'm afraid I don't see very short-term sign of Britain changing its political policy, because basically it follows what the United States wants. And if the United States wants tense relations with China, which it does, British government will do. So it's a good economically but bumpy politically is the way I would characterize it.
Emewu in Abuja, Nigeria. In fact, Chinese Foreign Minister Chen Gang just visited your continent over there, visiting 5 countries, as well as the headquarters of the African Union and the Arab Union over there. How do you see China's opening in terms of the benefits it can really bring to China-Africa relations in general and China-Nigeria economic relations in particular?
Of course, it's a welcome development that China has reopened its international borders to travelers, and inclusive of African travelers and those from Nigeria. To Nigeria in particular, 45% of international businesses between Nigeria and other worlds is between Nigeria and China. There's the high hope that all those businesses that were left pending between Nigerians and Chinese partners, we all kick off again. The visit of the FM, Mr. Chigang, that was a wonderful one. And he being at the AU implies being in the entirety of Africa, because there's no time he could run through the 54 countries of Africa or 53 that are on the focal platform. But being at the AU means discussing directly with Africa. And I know there are a lot of possibilities, there are a lot of benefits and impacts that will accrue to Africa and even to China from this opening up of the borders.
All right, you've been watching a special program, Insights and Impact. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I want to talk about the world economy because there are so many factors at play. There are so many competing dynamics at play. Bill Jones, let me go to you again in Washington, D.C. Look at the challenges to the world economy. There are many, from soaring inflation, as you mentioned, to supply chain disruptions, to the volatilities of commodity prices, geopolitical tensions. What do you identify as the more serious challenges, and how can China and your country, in this case America, go about dealing with them?
Well, the biggest problem is, of course, the fact that the world financial system, call it the New York, London financial system, is a debt bubble. There's more debt in the system. It can never be paid by production in the physical economy. Almost $1 quadrillion in flux, if you count up all the outstanding debt, private and public debt, cannot be paid, and therefore. The problem the world is facing is that there's a need for international financial reform to get some stability back into the system in which credit becomes a handmaiden to the physical economy and not something in itself. But at the present moment, it's a big problem. The second thing is that what we have been doing in terms of the geopolitics of trying to disrupt the international supply chain will lead to a decrease in productivity and a decrease in production. And it's going to be a very, very difficult situation going forward. We have to reestablish some kind of international financial cooperation between nations, focusing on increasing the physical production of the economy.
Mr. Guppy, let me turn to you in Australia. China is a major buyer, major consumer of commodities, such as iron ore, that's been, turned out by Australia. How do you see China's demand, which is hopefully, rising back to the pre-COVID levels, and what will it mean for Australia's producers over there?
Certainly, the increase in the Chinese economy will automatically lead to an increase of demand for Australian commodities, but also commodities worldwide. Going back to Bill's comments, we need to be aware that this idea of inflation is based to some extent on false assumptions. We talk about commodity inflation, but in fact, the price of oil now is as low as it was 18 months ago. So what's driving this inflationary spiral? It's not necessarily commodity prices. It is a debt-driven inflationary spiral that's related to supply side rather than demand side. So from an Australian perspective, the expansion of the Chinese economy opens up business opportunities that will be welcomed with open arms. What's important there is the on-the-ground mechanics of being able to make those connections, to be able to take advantage of trade with China in a way that is separate from the SWIFT cross-border trade settlement system, which is being held to ransom very much by America at this point in time. So China's digital currency is an important player in the expansion and globalization of the Chinese economy post-COVID.
Mr. Supachai Wuthichuwong in Bangkok, Thailand, how do you expect China's reopening to affect China-Thailand relations economic-wise going forward?
Let me give an example. On the first day of welcoming Chinese tourists, there is a large banner at the airport that writing in Chinese that say 中泰意接亲，泰国热情依旧, which represent Thai and Chinese are like family. Thailand warm welcome is still the same. Thailand has been waiting for the return of Chinese friends for more than 3 years. This is like a reunion. In Thai and Chinese language, there is a similar proverb that say 有朋自远方来，不亦乐乎, which means it is such a delight to have friends coming from afar. I think this is not just a tourism business, but a relationship and connection among people. I think when people have a good relationship with each other, cooperation in other matters will be smooth.
Mr. John Ross in London, I still want to get your take on the economic side of China's impact, the impact of the economic side of China's reopening. There's so many different forces at play, right? On one hand, rising Chinese consumer demand might push up sectors such as tourism, countries who are selling to the Chinese market. But on the other hand, rising Chinese demand might also push up prices like that of the oil. How are you looking at these competing dynamics?
If you look at the most fundamental factor in the situation, it's because that China has completely escaped the inflationary wave which took place in the West. I mean, the US launched with COVID one of the most disastrous stimulus packages that one could imagine. One might describe as a 100% failure. It produced the highest inflation for 40 years and lower growth than prior to that. China, due to its policies, entirely escaped this. And the latest inflation rate in China is 1.8%, which means the central bank has got quite a lot of room for maneuver. And therefore, you've got two totally different conversations. The discussion in the United States is only how much the economy will slow down. Will it go into a recession or will it grow very slowly? And the discussion in China, rightly, is how much is the economy going to speed up? And these are the fundamental factors of the situation.
Yeah, I want to seize upon what you said and go to Bill Jones in Washington, D.C. I mean, looking at it from the outside, how do you look at the Chinese economy?
Well, I think it's moving in the right direction, but of course, it will take a certain amount of time. I think you will see a lot more investment. You'll probably begin to see some tourists going back to China, and the restrictions that are being made are all not coming from China, but they're coming from the U.S. government, which is putting pressure on these people. But I think in terms of their own self-interest, the Chinese market for them is extremely important for business people here in the United States in many different areas which have been previously restricted. And I think you will see a positive reaction on the part of U.S. businesses.
Yeah, definitely. The negative list of foreign investment has been shortened significantly. And we're seeing that what kind of policies decided by the party during the Congress will be translated into laws, maybe even finding their way into the Constitution coming March during the two sessions. Mr. Guppy in Australia, JP Morgan believes that China's COVID-19 policy change will bring 1 percentage point increase in Australia's GDP. How do you see that happening?
I think that's certainly an underestimation. Pre-COVID, tourism, international students, mainly from China, and of course commodities were the three major contributors to Australia's export economy. So the return of Chinese tourists, the return of Chinese students is critical to a continuation of prosperity as Australia knew it in the pre-COVID period.
Going forward, what do you see as the major challenges that need to be overcome when it comes to strengthening China-Pakistan relations? Because it is vital. If you think about the success of Gwadar Port in Pakistan, which is, of course, the signature product of CPAC, which in turn affects the success of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Dr. Rao.
Yes, CPAC is a major factor for our economic cooperation and the development, and our economic cooperation can be further strengthened by resolving the security issues of the Chinese people at the working sites. If there is an energy project, we have to provide security, or just like the China is constructing airport in Gwadar. So we have to provide security. The security is the major concern from the Chinese side. Although Pakistan is working very hard to provide the security, and they have raised special security unit for providing security, but this is the major challenge. And the second challenge is the smooth functioning of the political government in Pakistan. But right now there is a transitional and the political little bit crisis. So that's why I think the strong political government can play a further better role to strengthen our economic ties and the bilateral relations.
Fair enough. All right, guys, let's take a short break. You've been watching Insights and Impact, this special program brought to you by CGTN. Fair enough. Guys, I want to talk about the future of the world. Recently, I've read a book that says there's a very interesting theory out there that basically says when we're witnessing a unipolar world, globalization seems to be strengthened and stable. If you think about the period between 1991 to the year 2000, when the former Soviet Union collapsed, and neoliberalism, like it or not, was the unifying system of the world. And then right after the global financial crisis in 2009, up until the US-China Cold War plus, globalization seems to have lost momentum quite a bit. And now as we're heading to a multipolar world where the unipolar world may not be with us anymore. How do you see the future of globalization? Why don't I start with you, Bill Jones?
Well, I think you have to distinguish between the globalization of the 1990s, in which it was really the freedom of capital to move wherever it wanted to go. And this was beneficial in some respect, but it caused a lot of discrepancies. There was a increasing gap between rich and poor. There was a lot of economic problems as a result of that. There was a lot of exploitation, a lot of moves to get resources from countries. So it wasn't a happy time for everybody. The problem that we have now is that we have to have a new type of globalization, which I think China has been very keen in putting forward with this Global Development Initiative. That is that the countries, all the countries of the world must begin to work together to discuss and to work out a plan that is beneficial for the people. And the center of that must be the people's livelihood. What is the good of the people? That's where we have to go. And in order to do that, we have to get away from this attempt to decouple or to create small groups of different countries based on so-called values, because that's going to be a disaster economically and politically, and it can lead to, and it can and will lead to military conflict unless it is put a stop to.
What are people saying around the Beltway about the potential visit by the top diplomat of the United States to China? I mean, at this point, with Kevin McCarthy, a seemingly hawkish figure from the U.S. House, what can be the direction of the future for U.S.-China relations?
On the one hand, the relationship between the presidents seems to be very good. They did come to very clear agreements at their last meeting, but that has really not been followed up a whole lot. And in fact, what we had recently, of course, is this meeting between the U.S. and Japan. It looks like they're moving in the direction of creating some kind of a global NATO. I think that's kind of redoing the results of World War II in one respect, that I think is very dangerous. So I think there's going to be a tough haul to bring U.S.-China relations into the kind of a situation that we would like to see. But it's worth the effort. It has to happen, and I think it will happen because the world wants it.
Yeah, Mr. John Ross in London, the UK, let me turn to you. What do you think about the theory where only a unifying ideology and the unipolar world can bring about globalization, or the acceleration of the process of globalization?
Let's look at the facts in the different parts of the world. Most parts of the world want to go ahead with globalization and regional integration. I mean, look at it. By far the most successful economic bloc in the world, if you want to call it bloc, I mean, trading is in East Asia with ASEAN. It's got the lowest inflation, the fastest growth. Why? Because it's absolutely refused to get divided on political lines. I mean, in East Asia, you've got every type of political regime virtually you could imagine. On the other hand, in Europe, you've got absolute chaos at the present time. And this is due to the policies of going on with the United States, the expansion of NATO, which is what's behind the Ukraine war. You couldn't have a more polar opposite. So it's actually the unipolar element, the United States, that's creating the chaos.
Mr. Guppy in Darwin, Australia, let me turn to you. Bring us the Aussie perspective about the future of globalization, your perspective.
We're moving into a multipolar world. The institutions of global governments need to recognise these changes. It's unreasonable to attempt to exclude the world's second largest economy from the formation of global standards that will apply to the digital economy in particular. Support for inclusive policy agreements, such as the Global Development Initiative, and support for the United Nations are the key ways to strengthen this cooperation. Although it may cause discomfort to the United States in particular, globalization is unstoppable. Exact form that it will take remains at this point in time an open question.
Dr. Rao in Islamabad, Pakistan, what is the future of globalization in your opinion?
In my view, China and United States are the two biggest players, the two biggest economic and political players in the world. They should have to take the world together. They should work together for the development of the global people. they have to serve as the both biggest economies played their role during the COVID-19. China provided the vaccines to the world and even to the Pakistan. China donated 5 million doses to the Pakistan. Similarly, United States donated the vaccines to the world. They bring out the world from the COVID-19 crisis. So if both countries will work together, then that would be the better for the globalization. Otherwise, the conflict is not better, I think, for the whole world.
Same question to you, Mr. Supachai in Bangkok, Thailand. What is the future of globalization in your opinion?
Yes, thank you. I do agree with President Xi Jinping's statement that China development must connect to the world, and the prosperity of the world also must connect to China. I think now China is reconnected to the world again. This should be the moment that the world has been waiting for. Nowadays, the world has enough problems. I think we should work together to overcome many hardships and share common prosperity together.
All right, Mr. Emewu in Abuja, Nigeria, what do you think?
Yes, there were times that the world was so polarized that everybody tended to mind his or her business in isolation. The reason is competition. Who leads and who follows? But the internet has become a glue that binds the whole world. Globalization has come to stay. I don't see it going away very soon. It could be threatened, but it's stabilized.
Yeah, I mean, Africa was a major beneficiary of globalization, right? Previously, I talked to the former vice president of the African Union. He told me that basically he expects more great power cooperation, not confrontation, when it comes to development of Africa. He said that basically Africa benefits a great deal from American scientific and innovative powers, and also benefiting from China's infrastructure plans, Belt and Road Initiative, so on and so forth. Do you think he has a point?
He has a point, very valid point. I agree with him totally, because first of all, globalization has made more parts of the world show more interest in Africa, especially China. And what China has done in Africa raised the level of competition that so many people seem to take a yardstick from the way China relates with Africa, very focal since year 2000. It has reignited what I call positive interest in Africa from the West, from America, from Russia, and the rest of the world.
All right, with that, we're coming to the end of this conversation. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this special episode of Insights and Impact, wherever you are. Many, many thanks. I also thank our viewers for tuning in at this hour. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. Our news coverage continues on CGTN. Bye and take care.